Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, I spoke earlier with Ryan Speeds, Managing Director of Sustainability over at Alaska Airlines, about airlines' decarbonization journey.
Yeah.
It's going to be a journey. It's going to be tough. I mean, no question that airlines want to get there.
They need more of that, right? An alternative sustainable aviation fuel.
They need more than just
they need a lot.
Yeah. International air travel's share of CO2 output is set to climb dramatically as other segments decarbonize. So as you see other parts of the business community use and emit less carbon, the share of airlines' carbon is going up.
Right.
It's going to be an estimated 22% by 2050 from 2% today if emissions aren't cut fast enough. This is according to a Bloomberg Big Take published last summer.
That's an incredible ramp up. So how do we get there? Sustainable aviation fuel, that's something you guys talked about. eVTOLs or battery powered electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Our next guest says he's got a solution, but the only way to get there is with hydrogen. Val Miftakhov is the founder and CEO of ZeroAvia. It's a company that says it's developing the world's first zero-emission engines for commercial aviation. Great to have you back with us. How are you?
Great. Great to be here. Thank you.
It's good to have you here. Remind our world, since it's been a little while, of what you are working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So we develop new generation of engines for commercial aviation, large aircraft going long distances, taking a lot of passengers. So we think the prime solution for that is hydrogen as fuel, and then hydrogen fuel cells and electric powertrain to bring the aircraft into the new future.
How far can it go?
It can go, actually, so we have different programs. Yeah, we start with a small aircraft and then go larger and larger. The largest aircraft that we can repower will go the same distance as, my flight later today goes to London, for example, right? So we believe that within the next 20 years or so, we will have engines for aircraft of that size and being able to go that type of distance.
Do you have to build entirely new aircraft, or can you strap a pair of these?
Like
for those
737
For those
MAX?
distances, you would have to modify the aircraft. Generally, you can get about half the maximum range of the fossil fuel aircraft without modification of the aircraft, or with minor modifications. Yeah, and that's our first launch. Will be like that, and then we work already with the aircraft manufacturers. Airbus is one of our major investors, for example. We already work with aircraft manufacturers on what's called clean sheet design, where they design aircraft around our engines.
Val, why 20 years?
If you look at the current engines, those beautiful things, huge engines off the wings of the aircraft, they've been in development from
GE.
1960s,
Yeah.
right? So,
Right.
And actually even before that, right? So right after the World War II, the first jet engines were developed. So we had almost 100 years of development, if you will, right? So 20 years is not that huge of a time, really, right? But it's what it takes to get the technology up to that level.
All right, Val, Mother Earth is calling and saying we're running out of time. My point is, if the technology's there, is it a case of those engines are really expensive, those planes are really expensive, and the cost of that changeover is what's holding things back?
Yeah, that's a significant component, especially in aviation, because you look at the automotive market, right? And my previous company was in the EV space, electric vehicle space. And there you have the lifetime of vehicle is just 10 years. And we've been already, since Tesla delivered Model S, it's already been 14 years, but we're still below 10% of the fleet, right, converted. In aviation, it's even worse. The lifetime of the commercial aircraft is 30 years. So, if it will take several generations, then we're not there by 2100, So we need to really push from the government side, from the operator side for fleet replacement very much sooner.
Sounds great. You still need to get the hydrogen, though. Where do you get the hydrogen?
Yeah, well, and we're here in Washington State, right, which is great because the grid is largely renewable, so we believe in green hydrogen production. We actually make all of our fuel for our testing ourselves.
But that uses a lot of electricity.
Yeah, it uses a lot of electricity, but you need electricity anyway to electrify, right? So you need energy, you need primary energy. Now, hydrogen electric approach, the approach that we have, is the most efficient way to use that energy. So think about hydrogen in our aircraft as effectively a energy carrier for renewable energy. The batteries are too heavy, fundamentally too heavy, right? Theoretically, you cannot make them light enough, you can make them lighter than today, but it's still not going to be sufficient for large aircraft going long distances. Hydrogen is the best carrier of that energy. So nothing else will really work, right? And sustainable aviation fuel you mentioned, the small portion of that can be made with biofeedstock, but this can repower less than 10% of aviation, right? For everything else, you would have to go what's called e-fuels, electrofuels, which start with green hydrogen and then add carbon capture, then adds additional chemical processes and all that. So the cost of that is so much higher than utilizing hydrogen in hydrogen electric that we think that we'll have some transition period with biofuels, and then hydrogen electric is what will take us to the real future.
What do we need in terms of government policy? You mentioned the government involvement. What specifically?
Yeah, so we need, we have some blueprints.
For the government to lead, yeah. How
yeah,
so?
We have some blueprint already from the EV industry, right? So a lot of the transition was driven by the progressive governments like California, for instance, right, with the low carbon fuel standards, with emission standards, and then there's some examples outside of the US, like Norway, for instance, right? Great policies to bring 90% plus new vehicles being sold are electric. Yeah, so policies like that for fleet modernization will be super important, and we are launching our first commercial product within the next 2 years. So we are talking to the government saying, hey, the technology is there. We're now officially in certification with the regulators across the world, right, and it will get here before 2 years, 3 years out. So we need the policies right now.
What does that route look like? Who are the operators who are taking that plan?
Yeah,
so you need buy-in from all constituents here.
You need demand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we already have over 2,000 engines on our order book, which is give or take $10 billion worth of future revenues already pre-booked. We have announced the production facility actually right here in Everett. Our first production facility going to be in the state of Washington, which is great.
Aviation history in the
state. And we're taking over Collins Aerospace engine production. So it's like a great story, fossil fuels. Right. So we already have demands, right? So you mentioned Alaska Airlines, right? They're our customer, they're our investor. We have United, American, British Airways, Amazon. So ecosystem is already supportive. I mentioned Airbus. We just signed also the world's largest deal with all 3 major airports in Canada, for example, Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto, plus Airbus and us together to bring them to hydrogen future, right? So the ecosystem is getting around this vision. Now we'll need the governments to really push it, help us push it.
Is that the biggest challenge? Just got 30 seconds left here. Is it just you need the government buy-in to be a little bit more aggressive with this?
Yeah, and in 2 ways, right? So we are now in certification, which means that we're working with government regulators to bring it to the market, and we need the right level of priority to this project, and then once it's done, actual help in bringing the fleets over.
10 seconds, you said you're getting on a plane to London tonight. What year will that plane be powered by your engines?
It will be powered, we will have engines like that by 2040.
All right, countdown is on.
Not sooner? I told you Mother Earth is calling.
I'm realistic, right? So it's a lot of startups out there. They say things that they cannot deliver, and then they fall on their faces.
Val, good to check in. We look forward to next time already. Val Miftakhov, founder and CEO of ZeroAvia, right here at the Green Festival in Seattle.
Well, speaking of changing behavior, that's what our next guest is certainly trying to do. Because back in March, a SpaceX rocket made history. It blasted off carrying a special payload, MethaneSAT, a highly specialized satellite that can spot methane leaks from the oil and gas industry. A missions, Carol, that other satellites can't see, and with it ushered in a new era of climate transparency.
That's right, the goal to motivate and enable urgent action to reduce methane emissions. Now, MethaneSAT, we want to talk about that because it's this incredible collaboration between the Environmental Defense Fund and organizations including aerospace companies, you've got space agencies also around the globe, academic institutions, and the nonprofit environmental advocacy group, the Environmental Defense Fund.
We've got with us the project lead of MethaneSAT, the guy who made it happen. Stephen Hamburg is Senior Vice President and Chief Scientist at EDF. He joins us here on site at the Bloomberg Green Festival in Seattle. We should note Michael R. Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies is a supporter of EDF. Bloomberg Philanthropies is the philanthropic arm of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg Radio. Welcome. First of all, congratulations. That March launch was a very, very big deal.
Absolutely, we couldn't be more excited, but really now it all begins because getting it into space and making sure it works is the first step, but the real issue is how do we generate the data and make sure it's actionable?
So what's the data that it's found?
Well, so far we've only been really testing. We've downloaded data and it's looking really good. We're really excited because it's really highly precise data. That's what we need to be able to answer the 3 basic questions.
Okay, so let's answer those 3 basic questions, because I want some context here to take a
Sure.
big step back and understand exactly what MethaneSAT is measuring here. Because there's an issue with gases being released that are invisible to the naked eye.
Absolutely.
And that happen all over the world.
Correct. So what we need is a global picture, and we need to be able to figure out where are those emissions occurring, how much is being emitted, and how they're changing over time. And we need to do that across the entire sector, and we can do that with MethaneSAT because we designed it with such high precision, and we are delivering the data as actionable data, meaning we're actually doing the processing to get it all the way to how much is being emitted from where.
Where is this data going to go?
So the data is going to be posted, public, anybody can look at it. It's free of charge for any non-commercial use.
Right.
And it will also be, of course, ingested into systems that allow it to be able to be integrated into whether financial services or whether it's just into regulatory processes. And so we have a whole team, because just producing data doesn't, you guys know it, doesn't cause change.
Right.
So we have a whole team from producing the data all the way through the action. So there's a whole group that works with us on advocacy, ensuring that the stakeholders are engaged, that people understand how to use the data. Because these data have never existed before. We have to get people to understand how to use them.
Are the stakeholders engaged, Stephen?
Absolutely.
I'm sure some of them are going to be a little fearful, right, in terms of what this data is going to show.
Absolutely, because it's going to show, obviously, those who are doing a good job and those who are not.
Right.
But absolutely. So the oil and gas industry knows that the things are changing. Transparency will be part of the future. And we're seeing also in the financial industry, we're seeing a lot of interest. I just spent a lot of time going to many of the major financial institutions talking about this. So we are seeing engagement, but it's still early days.
What do the financial institutions want to know?
They want to know how the data is actionable, right? And part of it is a conversation. So we're asking, what do you need to use it to make more informed decisions? And it's not just, so we have the financial sector, but we also have regulators. What do you need to know? So we have multiple different stakeholder groups, including civil society. And we are working with those groups to make sure we understand what type of data will be most effective for them to take the actions they need to take. And that's, again, something no one's ever done before, creating these diverse products out of a single data stream.
But is the action basic in the sense that we need to make sure we trap the methane that's being released into the atmosphere? Is that at its most fundamental basic level
Absolutely.
the whole point of the satellite?
Right, so there's no need. So we know that almost all the emissions that are occurring from the production of oil and gas don't have to happen. The technology exists. It can be the emissions can be reduced cost effectively in almost all cases.
And again, we're not talking about the burning of fossil fuels as a result of the end user. We're talking about the production of the gas.
And the transport. Most of it's occurring at the production end, so it's what we refer to as upstream. And that actually, the emissions are large enough right now that if you were to, as I do, I have a natural gas boiler in my basement, and if I'm burning that natural gas, the impact on the climate over the next 20 years of my doing that, half of it roughly comes from the methane loss before I ever burn it, and half from the CO2 that's being emitted.
Stephen, what do you think in terms of the general public, if they knew that is happening like in their own homes, how it might change their activity and their actions?
Well, I think the key is to give them options and to make sure that the suppliers of the gas are held accountable, because you don't, it's absolutely clear. There's a wide difference in these associated emissions, and there's nobody producing oil and gas who has to create these emissions. The technology exists. This is why this is not even low-hanging fruit, this is fruit on the ground.
Why haven't they done something? You know, this always blows my mind of like doing the right thing, right? They've got to know that they're emitting this into the air.
Well, actually, when we started...
do they not?
Well,
that's
the
part
point
of the problem.
When we started this work, so when I started working on this 14 years ago, the companies actually did not know. And as we collected data on the ground, not with satellites, there were surprises at every corner. And even today, most of the oil and gas companies have a very incomplete understanding of how much they're being emitted. So the key is to provide high quality data. We do not have enough high quality data about greenhouse gas emissions across the board.
Is it just the oil and gas companies, or are we seeing methane as a byproduct when it comes to the decomposition of trash at landfills?
Absolutely. So we have to think about all of the sources of methane. We focused on oil and gas first because, of course, it is economically so easy to do. I mean, it's literally no net cost. It's just got to get action. But we have to worry about waste. And also agriculture is a very large source, of which cows, enteric fermentation, waste from animals, also rice production. But again, there are tools we can use. It's more complicated because we're talking about many more actors and we're talking about a more complex system. But we are working. New Zealand, who's a partner in the New Zealand Space Agency, they have a whole program to collect data from MethaneSAT on agriculture around the world, and will again build that picture so we can start to get some better action.
You mentioned that as a partnership. What are the partnerships that you already have, like in the works, or that you anticipate are going to be coming in the future that will really kind of magnify the impact of this?
So we have partnerships with the UN Environment Program, the International Methane Emissions Observatory. We have partnerships, as I said, with New Zealand space agencies. We're partnering with philanthropic groups, right? So the Bezos Earth Fund has been an integral part of the funding that to make this possible, because we want to be able to provide this free. We also have partnerships that allow us to get that data out into many people's hands.
Stephen, as I mentioned, this was a really big deal when the satellite launched back in March. One of the reasons it was is because it has a complex set of instruments that allow it to see what no other satellite has been able to see before. Talk about the tech on board here. Like, what gives you the power to be able to see this from space?
Well, the real advantage of being here in the United States, because we're taking advantage of technologies that are at the very cutting edge. So it's ITAR protected, right? We have all kinds of controls as appropriately. And so we can provide a sensitivity, so we can see very, very small differences in concentration with these very highly specialized detectors. And then the kind of technology we have and the ability to put it together, we work with Ball Aerospace, now BAE, with really the leading instrument maker probably in the world. They built the Hubble telescope, the Webb telescope, and really bringing that kind of level of technology. And working with colleagues at Harvard University and also at Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory. So we just got a lot of really smart people leaning in with the world's best technology so that we're able to really take the technology a major step forward.
So when do we start to see lots of data?
Well, lots of data will be the beginning of next year, but we'll start seeing data before. We'll actually be we have an aircraft version, and we will, at the end of the month, be actually releasing a comparison of oil and gas methane emissions across the United States that we collected from the air with a very comparable instrument. And then we will be releasing data, because one of the things we have to make sure is that we really are confident that the data is solid and that it's fully validated, calibrated. So we're taking our time because we need to make sure we get it right.
How do you do that? How do you make sure? Because you know there'll be naysayers and probably people challenging you, and we do want to make sure we get it right. So how do you make sure that the information that's collected is accurate?
So of course, and we want people to challenge us, because we're doing something new. You want to make sure you get it right, as you said. So what do? There are sensors around the world that actually look up and give you data, and you compare what you're seeing down to what's going up. We also have data that we've collected in other means from places, so we compare our results to those. And we also ask, because we have to do a lot of modeling to get the final result. There's the last step. So we already have teams outside of our team taking the data and modeling, and then we compare the results. We're right now literally in the middle of a benchmarking study, working with funding from the National Science Foundation to collect very intensive data with aircraft and with the satellite, so that we can then create basically a laboratory in which people can analyze it, and we can see how it varies and really learn from each other.
So if all goes according to plan, what's the conversation that we're having 10 years from now? Are we talking about a decline in the methane emissions that have been released as a result of the imaging technology that you developed?
Why go 10 years?
I was going to say,
we
go
got
5.
4. In 2 years from now, we will have so much more data than, well, basically we've collected more data in the next 2 years than we've ever collected before. We will have, it's like we're going to put on a sharp pair of really high quality glasses, and greenhouse gas emissions across oil and gas will come into focus in a way we've never had. We need to replicate that across methane sources and other greenhouse gases.
But are those oil companies going to just respond by capping their methane emissions?
Of course not. That's why it's not just me, it's the whole data to action pipeline.
Right.
It has to be about bringing the many actors, whether those are financial institutions, governments,
Policies,
investors, policymakers. collectively, I'm confident because you're already seeing the industry. They're not high. They're making commitments. At the Conference of the Parties last December, 52 companies, mainly national oil companies, all committed to minimizing their oil and gas emissions. They got ahead of it because they realized this is going to affect them. Well, now we will have the data to see, great, congratulate them, they're doing the job, or saying, in fact, you haven't met your commitments.
Just got about 30 seconds left here. So what's still challenging, though, in this mission?
Well, I think the challenging is to provide these kinds of high quality data for the first time and make sure they're really of that quality. That's challenging the team, but everybody's committed. This is a team effort. We have people from commercial sector, we have people from academia, we have people from government all leaning in to produce the best, highest quality data and provide the very first sector-wide greenhouse gas emissions profile with empirical data. For the first time, we'll actually know what's happening.
Okay, be honest, did any part of you want to ride with that rocket, with that satellite?
I get motion sickness.
So no, okay.
That's a no. That's a no.
An absolute no.
Listen, it's one of those things that you need all of like public, private, everybody
Absolutely.
kind of in the game, if you will. Stephen, thank you so much. Look forward to, as the data starts to come out, the next few months sound like they're crucial.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Stephen Hamburg, Senior Vice President, Chief Scientist at the Environmental Defense Fund right here at the Bloomberg Green Festival in Seattle.